So now you have a basic introduction to one of the narrative frameworks that we'll be using for the course. As we move into the physiology portion of today's class, what we hope to show you is that telling your story involves our biology, evolution, experience, memory, and neural networks. The first point that we want to make is that our brain and the rest of our body learn in tandem. The spiral image that you're looking at is a representation of just how complex our brains are, an enlarging spiral of learning and memories. Through our bodily experiences and our learned and emotional responses to events, memories are laid down and our minds constantly reevaluate where we were, where we are, and where we are going. The human brain is the most evolved and advanced brain that we know of. No other animals have the capacity for such complex behaviors and sophisticated understanding. There are many, many parts of the brain, but for the purpose of this course, we are going to talk about the brain in terms of being made up of 3 parts. These are the reptilian or lizard brain, the emotional brain, and the thinking brain. Of course, this 3-part or triune brain is a vast simplification of all of the components that allow us to think and feel and act and dream and communicate and imagine. And, well, you get the idea. By starting with the triune brain, we'll get the basics established. We'll fill in more of the details later in subsequent modules. We'll start by taking a look at the lizard brain, which is the most primitive part of the brain. This part of the brain has been present for millions and millions of years and consists primarily of the brain stem and the hypothalamus. In the human brain, the hypothalamus sits above the pituitary gland and tells it how to inform the rest of the body about what is going on in the brain. The pituitary gland is the hormonal broadcaster of the output of the hypothalamus. Neuronal responses to what is happening both inside the body and outside of it are funneled to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus causes secretion of hormones into the bloodstream directly from the posterior lobe of the pituitary and indirectly from the anterior pituitary. The hormones act on all tissues in the body that have the appropriate receiving receptors in their cells to cause the tissue to react in a manner that meets the input demand. The hypothalamus also organizes the activity of the autonomic nervous system, which controls heart rate, blood pressure, gut activity, and breathing. It also changes the activity of all of these functions to appropriately meet input demands by acting on the brainstem. Finally, the hypothalamus organizes behavioral responses to challenges through regulating the way in which the brainstem controls behaviors. In addition to all of this, the lizard brain is also what causes us to have the fight or flight response. When you are confronted with a threatening situation, the lizard brain perceives danger and either causes us to freeze or to flee. It allows us to stay singularly focused on the threat at hand and act appropriately. What's great about the lizard brain is that in stressful and threatening situations, it's able to take over and override the other systems in our brain that would otherwise distract us from the immediate danger. For example, if you're hiking and encounter a bear, it's counterproductive to stand there and think about all the potentially terrible scenarios that could ensue, because by the time you've considered all of the outcomes, you would probably have been eaten. So to prevent this situation from occurring, the lizard brain kicks in, allowing us to get away from the bear without thinking about it. The second part of the brain that we're going to be talking about is the emotional brain, or the limbic system, which is where emotions are processed. The limbic system includes structures such as the amygdala, the olfactory bulb, the striatum, the hippocampus, and the insula and orbitofrontal cortex. The functions that these structures serve are to feel and react, dealing with everything from joy and sadness to anger, love, and surprise. This part of the brain is also considered the salience detector, telling us what is important, what to pay attention to, and what is rewarding. The reason that the limbic system is so important to humans and other mammals is directly related to our evolution and self and species preservation. One such behavior is the way in which we breed. We humans are born relatively prematurely compared to other mammals, and as a result need extraordinary amounts of nurturing in order to survive. In order for parents to raise a child, they have to literally be obsessed with it, because if they didn't, the child would die. Another function that the limbic system serves is to attribute significance to events. We experience things as good or bad based on the responses that are triggered in the limbic system. The final part of the brain that we'll be focusing on is the thinking brain, or prefrontal cortex. This allows us to anticipate the future, to think about what is going to happen next, and to look at our past, present, and future together, and make sense of it all. By the time neural signals have reached the prefrontal cortex from the body and sensory organs, a great deal of integration has occurred, and groups of neurons in the prefrontal cortex have information about what has happened, what is happening, and have the capacity to estimate what will happen, the if-then-what response. The prefrontal cortex is our conscious brain, where we think, and is capable of overriding signals from both the lizard brain and the emotional brain. It is here that we think about our stories and can interpret and reinterpret their meaning, even to the extent of realizing that something that was thought to be negative may in reality have positive aspects to it. All of these parts of the brain perform their functions by interacting with one another. This interaction is essential for our existence. On the topic of interaction, it is the brainstem that allows our body to communicate with the rest of our brain, and that keeps us alive. All of the information from sensations generated in the body pass through the brainstem, allowing us to interpret and navigate our environment. The brainstem also regulates things such as our blood pressure, heart rate, and breathing. What you see here are the long, narrow cell groups of the nucleus of the tractus solitarius, and the fatter cell groups, called the parabrachial nuclei, that do a lot of integration at this level, in conjunction with the primary sensory nucleus of the eye, the superior colliculus. Even frogs have well-developed brainstems, and this is what allows them to slurp up flies with their tongues. The eye-tongue coordination occurs in the brainstem. There's a lot of interaction between sensory inputs and behavioral outputs at each level of the brain. When we're in danger of being hurt by our environment, such as being burned by a spark thrown out of a fire or seeing a bear charging at us, it's our brainstem mechanisms that enable us to act instantly to avert the threat. We have lots of other higher brain mechanisms that will usually also eventually kick in, but the brainstem, the lizard brain, responses are faster than any others. These responses can occur before we've even had a chance to realize that we are responding. When the thinking brain is working as it should, then eventually it can regain control over the lizard brain and think about the reactions that just happened and the situation that caused that reaction. We humans all have the advantage of a great storehouse of learning and memory that we call on to determine the appropriate response to what is happening now. For instance, different people will have different responses to the same visual stimulus. In this case, the stimulus is the vision of a cave. The person on the left, who has fine and exciting memories of spelunking in caves in the South Dakota National Park System, responds to the picture of the cave with eagerness to go and explore it. The person on the right, who maybe has been to Afghanistan and cleared caves occupied by the Taliban, may appropriately dislike the notion of going to visit the cave in that picture. For the last time that he was in a cave, he and his buddies were in great danger. In the situation of grave danger or severe stress, the emotion brain, the amygdala, can override the thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, triggering emotion-driven, habitual responses. The amygdala causes a sensation of anxiety that reduces the efficiency of the prefrontal cortex activity, but causes stimulation of structures in the emotional and lizard brains, resulting in emotional reflexes occurring in midbrain behavioral motor output pathways. The resulting sensations can be that sinking feeling in the pit of the stomach, feeling on edge, and moving away from that triggering thing. By bringing the thinking brain back online in such a situation, you can regain control over emotional, reflexive reactions. There are exercises that are known to help re-engage the thinking brain during periods of stress. We'll be practicing some of these exercises in the modules to come.